Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be starting in 1 minute. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining Upland's webinar. I'd like to introduce Dan Rosium. He's Engineering Manager for Bechtel Plant Machinery. Today, he's going to give us a really interesting overview of implementing EPM Live as a standard project management system for his organization. We're recording the webinar, so you'll be able to watch it on demand and share it with your colleagues. And we will also have an opportunity for Q&A after Dan completes his presentation. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dan. Dan, over to you.
Thanks, Amy. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to some of you. I'd like to thank Upland, EPM Live, Amy, and her team for giving me the opportunity to present to you our story and how we've evolved with our use of the product over the 7 years we've been together. As Amy said, I'm the engineering manager for Bechtel Plant Machinery, known as BPMI. BPMI is owned by Bechtel, but we operate as a prime contractor for the United States Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. So we are part of an overall program that has over 7,000 people that are part of it. Our specific entity, BPMI, has about 900 plus employees located in different places throughout the eastern part of the United States. Our primary mission is to develop and design and manufacture and procure components for installation in reactor plants for submarines and aircraft carriers for the U.S. Navy. We also provide a lot of field service work, installation, fabrication oversight, and procurement management to kind of complete the whole product life cycle. So currently, I'm an engineering manager in the reactor servicing area of the business, and I'm also part of the BPMI Project Management Council. Previous to that, I was the IT product development manager and a publishing technology development manager, and I've been with the company for approximately 11 years. So about 7 years ago, we started on our journey with EPM Live, and currently I'm still the system owner. I'm the one who actually kind of started the whole project back then, and we're going through a major system upgrade, so that will be part of our discussion today as well. At Bechtel, part of our culture is safety. And we, as tradition, start every single presentation with a safety message. Today, I chose to utilize a drawing that was submitted by one of our employees' children as part of an annual safety calendar contest. The message is quite simple. It pertains to railroad crossing safety, and it just simply says, never stop on the tracks, the train never loses. Now, later you'll see how this also ties in some of our lessons learned in regard to deployment of the EPM Live system. Okay, to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give you a high-level view of our business and how we're using the product. Now, I assume that you're not going to know a whole lot about how we do our business, and that's okay, so I'm going to try to keep things as generic as possible. I'm going to go through our business case and why we thought we could benefit from having a common project management tool. I'm going to talk about how we selected EPM Live. I'm also assuming some of you are potentially evaluating the product, as well as some of you are users. Bear with me as we go through the selection process discussion. I won't take too long of your time there, but I do think there's some good lessons learned that can be applied if you're still struggling with user adoption, even if you've already selected the tool. And then I want to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the benefits that we've realized to date from the current system use. I want to talk about the system upgrade that we're currently going through. We're currently on version 3.2.7. We're going to 5.6. It's actually going to end up probably being 5.6.8. We're currently at 5.6.6 in that process, but I think we're going to roll it up to 5.6.8. And I'm going to give you generic lessons learned that apply to all those different aspects. as we go through it. And again, a couple other assumptions. I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the basic project management principles, management of scope, schedule, resources, risks, and quality. I'm going to assume that you're somewhat familiar with change management practices, something maybe similar to the ADKAR model, which we'll talk about, and how that can help from a user adoption standpoint. And then also, just to fit within the time allotted for today, I'm really only going to be representing one business area within our organization. We've got quite a few number of users, as I'll discuss, but I'm going to represent basically just one unit's use of that, which is about 120 folks out of the 1,400 users that we have, just so we can kind of get into the details a little bit further there. Okay, a couple of background points just for perspective. Given the nature of our work, we are on a standalone classified network. So we do not have connectivity to the internet, so we don't use Upland's cloud service. We're an on-prem installation, which brings its own challenges when you're doing both the installation and any kind of troubleshooting and long-term maintenance and support, but we've got a pretty good model that we've worked through with EPM Live there. We're currently at 3.2.7, which I previously said, which is based on SharePoint 2007, Project Server 2007, Windows Server 2003. All that's getting upgraded. Over 1,400 users across 6 geographic locations. There's 13 different departments or business areas that use the tool, and every single one of those has a different structure. There are 6 production site collections with over 400 plus workspaces. I don't know if you guys are familiar with how the tool is set up, but all of that was intentional to be able to accommodate the multiple corporate instructions and policies and the different use cases that different user communities have. Okay, here's a high-level picture of what our environment currently looks like. Again, 6 different site collections, so here's an example of a couple of them that are broken up different ways. On the left-hand side, we have things delineated by program and then by project within that. It's very hierarchical in nature. On the right-hand side, it's more organizationally broken down instead of by program, where we have departments and then sections or units within those departments, and then the projects within those groups. Now, this is, again, nice from the standpoint that it allows flexibility. Everybody has their own workspace. You can kind of tailor it to meet your own individual needs, while still, if you have enterprise roll-up fields and everything matches all the way up, roll data all the way up through the site collection. So you're getting kind of a good balance of those two things. The cons really are in regard to performance and the difficulty to administer the system. There's a lot of settings on a lot of different sites if you want to make a global change, and the sync down capability in that current version of the tool helps us do that, but it still is a little bit challenging. Now again, this, for perspective of the different units, business area units that are using the tool, one may use it for basically managing subcontracted procurement and fabrication oversight of components. Another uses it for production and maintenance schedules at an operational type facility where it's got more predefined work that's easy to schedule out down to very detailed levels. And another uses it for managing the schedules and resources of key designer and drafting and technical services resources to make sure that the whole portfolio of design projects gets balanced appropriately. Okay, a little bit of background on why we thought we needed a tool. Now, Bechtel, our corporate parent, is a global engineering and construction services company that has excelled at project management for a number of years. However, locally, while we still were able to leverage a lot of that knowledge base, we felt like we could consolidate multiple tools to reduce some inefficiencies that we were seeing to kind of improve our overall project planning, our performance, and just to increase visibility. You know, part of that is to take on your risk management strategy and say, okay, you guys are maybe managing your risks, but let's do it in a consolidated fashion that's consistent across the board so you can get easy roll-up of data. We want to make our information that's out there much more accessible. Hopefully that improves knowledge management, and again, aligning the tool with your policies and procedures to make sure everything is accordingly lined up. Now, when we set out on this initiative, we kind of pulled together some key folks in one business area and said, let's develop some high-level evaluation criteria. Let's go find a tool that can address these shortcomings that we have, these gaps, and let's go off and implement it. So we did some industry research. We used folks like Gardner and Forrester. We did some independent work as well, went out and benchmarked, made cold calls to companies, and asked them to hook us up with some of their customers to talk and ask questions. We ended up actually bringing 4 different tools into the fold in regard to evaluation and kind of made a matrix, had our own criteria defined, and worked through it. EPM Live was selected, and really for 3 reasons. Number 1, it had the best overall fit for the evaluation criteria that we had outlined. Number 2, it leveraged the use of Microsoft Project, which we were very heavily using, and Microsoft SharePoint, which we're a Microsoft shop, so we were starting to leverage the benefits of SharePoint more and more, and we wanted a tool that was integrated with that. And it was very schedule and resource favorable from a time and cost to stand up and maintain. A couple of key notes here on this slide also to keep in mind, and this will kind of come back into play in the lessons learned. When we started this out, we kind of brought in as many people to get buy-in as possible. And while that was good to kind of get the project moving, it made it a little bit difficult to accommodate everybody's unique needs right out of the box and right out of the gate. So it made it a little difficult to get the project off the ground at first. We almost had too many criteria that we were trying to satisfy at once, and I'd caution against that, and I'll talk a little bit about that again in the lessons learned later. And the other thing to keep in mind here is all of this was being driven by that business area, by that line of business, if you will, not from a centralized PMO, not from the top down. It was very much a grassroots kind of within that organization, and we had senior leadership within that organization bought in the whole time, but it wasn't centralized. Again, I want you to remember that, and it wasn't driven by IT either. Okay, so initial implementation of the tool, we started using it really toward the end of 2011, 3.2.7 version that we're currently on. Before that, we actually did an entire pilot program. We detailed out what we wanted the tool to look like, how we wanted it configured. We brought it on site, had EPM Live install it. We did a stabilization period on it, used it for a while, gathered up some lessons learned, and said, hey, let's go redesign it. Now we think we really know what we want it to do. Went through that whole evolution, and again, kicked it out in 2011. 4 years later here, we're still in use. Okay, so some of the benefits that we're seeing today, really going back to the whole business case, we've really been able to achieve a lot of these. We have a common method now where we've consolidated multiple tools, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But then there's some natural outcomes of that. So when everything used to be dispersed, people manually had to gather that data, whether that was on a project basis or a summary basis or portfolio basis across those multiple projects. By having it all consolidated, obviously you're going to get improved reporting capabilities. You're going to get better visibility, roll-up of data, things can be automated, and with that, your information is a whole lot more accessible as well. So you know where to look for the same information from project to project. It's consistent. It really enables knowledge management. You're not spending time during project transfers and turnovers at different junctures trying to learn where people stored things or how people were managing the project. It's more focused on learning the technical aspects of it now instead, which is really nice. Everything is all done the same way from project to project. Okay, so this is as close as I'm going to get to talking through kind of how our business model works. These are basically different aspects of a project that were being managed in disparate systems. People were keeping track of risks and issues maybe on a scratched piece of paper or in a Microsoft Word document. Supplier submittals are pieces of paper that procedures that come from folks that we've subcontracted with They send those in for our review. We respond to them formally. It was all tracked in a separate database. Project documents, all your Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all those files, any drawings or technical analysis type files, those were stored from local computer drives to shared network drives to SharePoint sites. Contract surveillance plans, which is basically how we go out and make sure that folks are building the equipment to our technical specifications correctly. Those were done either on a notepad or in a Microsoft Word document or an Excel document, again, not in the system. We've standardized on all of these things, the references and drawings lists. We've built custom lists now that link to the electronic repository for the source records of these things. It's all stitched together on a project basis. So now all these things that used to be in separate databases or not even in a database are now consolidated into one tool, and it's done consistently across every single project. So obviously that allows for some really improved reporting, which I talked about. So the bottom of the pyramid here kind of shows all those elements, again, that we've kind of consolidated together. And then from a project standpoint, what kind of reports can you get out as the project manager? Your risks, you can communicate that easily to all of your stakeholders and senior management. Supplier submittal reports, what's overdue, what are they lacking that they haven't sent in yet, what do we still have in-house that we need to review and approve. Contract surveillance plans, where are they at in the fabrication of that equipment? When do we need to go out and have different checkpoints to make sure they're progressing satisfactorily? And then the technical documentation reports. Our equipment is designed to last for a long period of time, well beyond 40 years. And we joke and say it will outlive your career, and that's true. So it's important to have good documentation. When everything was in separate systems, you had to manually keep track of everything to tell your successor where all that information is located. Now it's in one place. We can easily get an outputted report that's clickable to those electronic source files, which makes everybody's life a whole lot easier. And then summary reports, the top of the pyramid. How is your portfolio of projects getting rolled up? What key information does staff or different folks within your organization care about? For us, we talk about surveillance. That's an important thing. We have sometimes multiple pieces of equipment that are all managed by different individuals at the same facility. So we want to be able to see the surveillance plan across that whole facility, across multiple projects. We can do that easily now. But really the key here is to know, once you start getting data in the system, where you're going to get value out of the system. And reports are a very powerful way to do that. So you get value out for the project managers, the end users in the middle tier of your pyramid, and you get value out at the top to staff and the different stakeholders from a summary or portfolio standpoint as well. And the reason why that's important is you can't skew it just one way or another. You have to really be intentional about where you're going to capture value in all different levels of your organization to help from an adoption standpoint. Okay, so I want to spend a brief second just to kind of walk you through some of the reports that we're currently using, not to dive into the details too much, but again, these are what we call project status summary reports. We kind of shorten that to an A3 because we print these out on 11 by 17, an A3 size sheet of paper. All of this is clickable. So this all takes you right back to the electronic, records, the list items, the documents, whatever it might be within the EPM Live system. But it's a very nice summary report that can kind of give you a high-level status of everything that's going on your project. So the risks, the issues, the contract delivery dates, what upcoming commitments. Commitments for us are basically just a promise to a customer by a certain date we're going to complete something, so we keep track of those. There's a more detailed version of this as well, second page, where we're going to get into what procedures are coming and going between us and our suppliers, what contract surveillance is occurring at that facility, recent project documents. You can see on the right-hand side kind of a summary of all of the different project milestones, and the burn chart in regard to what's being completed on time versus not. So this is a powerful mechanism to kind of pull all that information together. It's great for the project managers and for the staff to get a quick status of everything that's going on. I alluded to everything being clickable. This is a risk report, again, just kind of a basic summary report that identifies all the different risks that are on the project and your total risk exposure, probability times your impact, and when it's due. And you can get into a detailed assessment plan for each one of those risks and rack out what's the trigger, what's the contingency, what's the closure criteria, how does it impact the project, how are you going to mitigate it down to a lower probability or impact, and hopefully eventually retire that risk if it doesn't get realized. That's all drillable from that top-level status report as well. Here's an example of a contract surveillance plan summary report. Again, this kind of pulls in all the different surveillance items from multiple purchase orders across multiple suppliers so we can get a good summary view of that useful tool for us. Here's a technical documentation report that I referred to earlier. This is a very thin, I should say, on information, just so I can kind of fit it all on one screen here, but there are 8 different sections. Over 75% of it now gets completely generated automatically by the EPM Live system. So you can imagine a project that lasts for maybe 2 years, and you're going to have hundreds of records in each of those sections, and that's all going to be stitched together for you automatically now, which is easy. So that's the power of reporting once you have defined what information you want to capture. So again, trying to show how you can achieve value once the information's there. Okay, I want to transition now over to kind of where we're at today in regard to the system upgrade that we're going through. Again, we're using kind of a dated version of the system. Windows 2003 is going to be at the end of life this month. Actually, it is end of life as of the 15th of this month. So we are moving to a new version of Windows Server, a new version of SharePoint, and a new version of Project Server, and a new version of EPM Live. And that is all scheduled to be completed by the end of this year. We're trying to not only upgrade the system to take advantage of the new features and functionality, but we also want to pull all of our data with us, which makes it a little more challenging. We don't want to let go of that legacy data. Again, I told you that we are an on-premise solution, so there's some inherent challenges there. EPM Live has configured the system external to our environment, and then basically brought the database on site, done an install of that once we had all the servers set up, ready to go. And now we're just kind of in the final stabilization period before we get into the data migration. Part of this upgrade, I talked about how we had extreme flexibility from workspace to workspace. While we don't want to lose that completely, we are trying to drive a little bit more commonality as well. So that is part of it as well. We're trying to manage change there. We're very schedule and resource constrained on this project. We're up against the deadline to get this shut down and transitioned over to the new system. And we're also really trying to make sure we don't impact our users while we do this. We're really trying to limit that system downtime and make sure we don't have any conflicts with when we're going to make the cutover group by group. Part of our strategy for upgrading to 5.6.6 involves what we call a gap analysis. Originally, we were planning on doing a stepped migration where we would upgrade everything sequentially from the infrastructure and EPM Live software standpoint through all the various version levels to kind of keep the data intact. But with the amount of redesign of the system that we wanted for some of our business areas, we really thought that that was going to be more challenging than worth the while. So based upon consultation with EPM Live, they convinced us that kind of a fresh install, a fresh design and build of the new system is the way to go, and that we could then do an analysis to say, what do you have today in your inventory in the old system versus what do you want it to be in the new system per your new design, and then how do we migrate and map that data over so that you don't lose anything. They presented a couple different case studies to us where they have done that and done it successfully and done it very well. So we went with that approach, and the tool that's being used to help assist that is called MetaViz, and EPM Live is partnered with MetaViz Technologies, and they're able to help migrate that data over. We still have to go through a stepped upgrade with Project Server. There's no real way to kind of take the database and just dump it over from 2007 to 2013. You have to go through 2010 in an interim environment and then over to 2013. From a timeline standpoint, we really started this in July of last year. We kind of detailed out the design. Again, the nature of our business is we have to get approval of the government of that design. We got that. We got the contract kicked off in January 2015. We started configuring the servers through March. eChemLive hosted us for testing and accepting their configured version of the software in April. And then really it was May when they came on site, end of April, beginning of May, came on site, did an installation. Been back in the month of June to kind of finish that installation, and we're setting up some additional dev and training environments as well. Meanwhile, while that has been installed, our IT folks, we've also got doing some custom integrations with other business systems to kind of help pull some of that data from other places into the eChemLive tool, enabling reporting and just getting a complete picture of your project then. That's scheduled to wrap up in the September timeframe. And then right on the heels of that, and it may push out maybe into October or a little bit beyond that, is when we're going to start the actual data migration. And again, our goal is to have the system shut down before the end of the year and up and running on the new 566 system. Okay, I just want to give a quick overview of what the new system will look like compared to our current system. We had 6 different site collections in the old current system. In the new one, we're going to a single site collection architecture. We're going to have multiple parent sites that are going to function as those departments, what used to be site collections basically, and then project center items in the new one. This is a completely virtual hierarchy now. Instead of it being a physical workspace for every single project, we no longer have that. It's actually all on one list and all permission controlled. It's very nice. It improves performance greatly. It simplifies administration greatly. Gives you much more consistency from each project standpoint because you've kind of locked that environment down a little bit more. You're using enterprise lists and fields, across each of those. It's very good for reporting and it's very scalable. So really the biggest downside is the lack of flexibility, but you still have that to an extent because for each project center item, as you can see by the second one over from the left, you can still tag a physical workspace to that project center item. At that level, you can build all of your custom lists and configurations that you want and still get that look and feel that you may want for your project if it merits some special cases. Okay, I want to transition over to the lessons learned portion of our discussion today. Really, again, if you guys have already picked a tool, bear with me, but I do think there's some key things that I would do differently if I were to do this all again. It may help with user adoption during that phase when you're actually selecting product. And then I want to talk about, again, implementation and user adoption, system upgrades, and then final conclusions, and then have an opportunity for questions and answers. So really basic principle here, I would run it absolutely as a project. Make sure you define a good business case, have good criteria for selecting a tool, and then obviously pick good candidates to evaluate against those. I would make sure you do a pilot. I thought that was invaluable to us. We learned a lot from that. You have to figure out your training strategy as well. We've gone with a strategy that eChemLive has recommended, a train-the-trainer model, where we have experts and basically train to train more people. And then you have folks that are experts within each business area that they can kind of be your champion there. You really have to think about, from a schedule standpoint, how you're going to implement it and what phases you're going to have and how that's all going to work out. And know your constraints. Know what funding streams you have, what resources you have available. Are you going to be an on-prem solution? How much IT support do you have? Do you need? Are you going to use the Upland Cloud? How much are you going to rely upon the supplier versus your in-house capabilities? So this is just a suggestion. You do not absolutely have to do this. But again, defining your case and your criteria together, I think, is important. Using a tool maybe like the SWOT analysis, I hope most of you guys are familiar with that, where you're going to identify your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And then based upon those, you want to try to hash out what features are going to leverage those strengths or address those weaknesses or turn an opportunity into something that you can capitalize on. And maybe take, from a threat standpoint, more of a risk management view. What risks are there to the project being successful? And what do you really need to account for that's maybe unique in your implementation? So as you go through that, you can kind of start to flow those down then from the SWOT analysis into the what features do you want, and then what functional requirements for each of those features. And all of that has to be cohesive with your IT infrastructure, okay? So that's really your business case and your criteria working together to help give you that clarity. Now, it doesn't mean you have to attack everything at once, and I'll kind of talk about that later as well. From a candidate standpoint, again, I mentioned Gartner and Forrester are great tools to go out there and to see what products are available, and then go ahead and evaluate them against that criteria which you've now defined. And again, the SWOT is to kind of help you scope out what are your key criteria. And then go ahead and select the best candidate. And again, we believe we've picked the best candidate in regard to our case and criteria being UPM Live. I talked about this already. I want to kind of zoom in on the last two bullets of this slide. Definitely phase your deployments by prioritized features. You may want to solve all of your problems at once. While that's a noble ideal, it's not really very manageable from a user adoption standpoint or just even implementation standpoint. You have to use some really good change management techniques, or else you're going to lose your folks as you go through that evolution. So talked about the SWOT, talked about using the cloud if possible. It can greatly simplify it. Again, if your security requirements don't allow you to do that, that's understandable. And the pilot is very valuable as well. One other note on a pilot, make sure you have the right size and the right number of people and the right people. You don't want folks that are trying to prove that you don't need the tool on the team. You want folks that are going to give honest and constructive feedback so that whatever lessons you're going to learn, whatever improvements you're going to make can be captured in a cohesive fashion that will benefit when you go to your actual production deployment. Okay, so one trick that we've used here recently in regard to time phase deployment by features is going back to your SWOT analysis and saying, okay, what features do we really think we want to try to adopt first? And we kind of just rank them, kind of an agile type mentality. We say, what's the benefit of implementing that feature, and what's the ease of adoption? It's just a subjective feel, and you kind of multiply those out and you get a score, and we rank them. And we say, okay, well, that's the first one we want to go attack, and then this is the second one we want to go attack, and so on and so forth. And then we kind of group them in phases where we said, hey, phase one, these are the 2 or 3 features we want everybody to adopt. Phase 2, these are the features that we want everybody to adopt. Phase 3, these are the features we want everybody to adopt. It's a different approach than where we started out. We started out with, let's have group A adopt every feature, and then group B will adopt every feature. And we really struggled from that standpoint because we're taking a bunch of non-swimmers and throwing them into the deep end and saying, why can't you swim? Whereas going the other way, you're starting everybody in the shallow end. Even if you've got some folks that are going to be what we call your earlier easy adopters that are going to want to run ahead, that's fine, let them do that. If you're, from a policy standpoint, okay with that. But you want to move everybody slowly through the use of the tool. And then make sure you're aligning your training with those phases. So again, you want to have good requirements for that use. We use something called Quick Start Guides to kind of put together a 1 or 2 page tip sheet that gets people to be able to do exactly what we want them to do in the system in a very easy fashion. Those are a great resource. Okay, so talking about user adoption, going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, I talked about the train never loses. Okay, so 2 different extremes in how you're going to facilitate that change. And you have to really balance that. The train never loses is basically saying use it or else. You're going to force people to do it. Whereas the other approach would be make the tool so nice people can't resist using it. That's what we would call the field of dreams. Okay, if you build it, they will come. In reality, neither of those work perfectly independently. You have to find the appropriate balance between the two. You want the tool to be as attractive as possible, but you have to have good top-down support where you're going to be able to drive implementation and use of the tool and keep people accountable. A good model for doing that is the ADKAR change management model. Okay, I'm not going to go through the slide in complete detail, but people have to have, well, first let me look at the axes. So adoption, success, and maturity on the left-hand side, and phases of change for users going across the bottom. You're going to improve your adoption, success, and maturity as you move your users through these phases, okay? First, they have to have an awareness, okay? There's some tips for how you create that awareness. Share the SWOT with them. Let them know where we think we need to change and why. You can communicate that formally. You can communicate that in trainings, in meetings, however you want to do that. You then have to create that desire. You know, why should they support that change? The what's in it for me principle. Show them the benefit. And again, that's where I talked about at the beginning, where once you know what data you want in the system, be intentional about what value you're going to get out and for what user communities and at what level within the organization people are going to be getting value out, because that helps create that desire. If end users are seeing the value and executive staff is seeing it and your project managers are seeing it, then you're going to have that desire throughout your organization and have a much easier time adopting. Okay, knowledge is the next step. You've got to train your users, use quick start guides if possible. Again, we kind of will train experts and then let the experts train other people. It's a good model so you don't have one person or two people trying to train 1,400 users. And then the ability thing here at the end is kind of making sure that they have the actual skills and behavior that you desire at this point. That's where you got to have good user support, be able to answer questions, make sure that they're stable, and all of that is built upon a good foundation of reinforcement. You've got to have reinforcement, whether that be audits, reports, ways to keep people accountable. Make sure that they're doing what you've asked them to do. One of the best ways you can undermine change is to tell people to do something and never follow up on if they've actually done it. So reports are a great mechanism. That's why we've built so many reports. Not only are they useful, but it really helps reinforce and sustain that change as we go forward. So now, marrying together both the phased deployments that I talked about and the change management, if you kind of put it all together in one picture, you get this, where you're going to feature by feature, phase by phase, get people to go through these little mini change cycles. Okay, now everybody's a little bit more mature in their use of the tool. Now we're going to take on the next set of features in the next phase, do the same change management cycle again. And that reinforcement wedge just keeps growing and growing and growing, and your success and your adoption and your maturity are going to improve over time as well. Okay, so some really quick summary points on the system upgrade. Make sure you use the cloud if possible. Stay current. Don't get too far behind on your versions. You want to minimize the number of customizations as possible. You want to try to find the right balance between being common yet being flexible as well. Involve the supplier, involve Upland, involve EPM Live. They've got a lot of knowledge from their customer base. They can point to multiple case studies to make sure you've picked the appropriate methods for upgrading the system if you're in a situation like we are. Plan in advance. You know, it's huge. There's lots to coordinate from an IT infrastructure standpoint, the EPM Live releases, when they're going to come on site, how they're going to perform the install, how it's going to work with all your other integrations with your other business systems and stakeholders. So you just have to, again, really manage that project well. Here is kind of the tail end of the presentation today, kind of recapping some overall thoughts and themes that we've hit on multiple times throughout the slide deck. You have to have a roadmap, if you will, make a plan in advance if you're going to adopt a project management software suite or tool or cloud-based solution. Have an objective, have an end state vision, know where you want to be and why, okay? And you really should take the time to architect that all out and understand what are your strengths, weaknesses, what opportunities and threats are there. Have a good planning tool behind that. SWOT is a useful mechanism. It's not the only mechanism, but it's a good one. Manage your scope. Make sure it's the right size. Don't go too big too early. You're going to have a really hard time gaining user adoption. And make sure you understand what it is that you're really trying to fix as well. And do it in a phased or agile approach where you're going to kind of say, here's, again, the basic stuff we want you to do today, and then add a little bit more tomorrow, add a little bit more the next day, so on and so forth. Managing your resources, kind of a basic one-on-one concept here. Make sure you have good top-level support, executive sponsorship, somebody who's going to help be that train that's driving that change. We talk about that at the bottom of the slide as well. You want to have user champions that are going to know the system, be supportive of, again, the awareness, the desire, parts of that change management process to really help sell the implementation. And then from a change management standpoint, think about where you're coming from in your organizations as you go to adopt a tool. Are you coming from a line of business? Are you coming from a PMO? Are you an executive? Are you a project manager that thinks that you want to try to grow this from the ground up? How are you going to manage that? Who's really driving that train, if you will? And then from a Field of Dreams standpoint, how are you going to make it as attractive as possible and get as much value out of it as possible, okay? And that's really where, again, going back to the multiple levels of value, reports are a great way to do that. That's really everything that I had today. If there's questions at this point, Amy, I think you said you would screen those and send them over to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I've got a couple of questions coming in. First one is, what would you recommend to help gain executive level sponsorship for a project like this?
Okay, it's a great question. Something that we actually struggle with at first as well. I talked about the one business area. We had good buy-in from that executive there, but we definitely struggled at times at the beginning to convince other people, that this was a good idea. It's really, you got to show them, okay? You have to show them what kind of value they can get out of it that they're not getting today, okay? And whether that be from an efficiency standpoint, you can put together a business case on, hey, we make an estimate, X number of hours or man years creating these reports across the 100 projects that we have in our organization. If we go spend X number of man years or Y number of man years to implement a system like this, you can get some push button reporting essentially that would be a good return on that investment. So you've got to make those business cases. They're going to care about the cost to stand it up, cost to maintain it, your total cost of ownership, and then really what's in it for them. What are they going to get out of it that they aren't getting today? And you really have to show them. Some of that can be done via the pilot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so another question came in and said, how long did it take to implement the system?
The original system we implemented over, we finished the original design at the end of 2008. We did a pilot through 2009, and then 2010, we redesigned the system and redeployed it within, basically we started toward the beginning of 2011, and about 8 months until we went live with it. Now, our time spans are a little bit longer than what you traditionally see. Part of that is because we have some very standard turnaround times that we have to get government approval for different things, okay? So some of that gets extended. It's, EPM Live's pretty good about being able to turn things around and build out a system very quickly. They've got some really good quick start type stuff. They can get a system up and running on the cloud probably, a third of the amount of time it takes to do it on-prem for us.
Okay, great. Somebody's asking, what specifically would you show executives? What would they want to see when you're getting that executive level of sponsorship? Follow-up question to what you were talking about earlier.
Sure. one thing that was a big selling point for us was what I call the A3 report. It's that status summary report. If I actually go back through my slides, I don't know if everybody can still see them. These two right here are something that once we said, hey, this is what you could get automatically, they said, wow, that's really nice. I could get that, and I wouldn't have to have people, have that in an Excel file and always be jumping in there to update an Excel file. I could just pull that on my own. That was a big selling point for them.
Great, great. Another follow-up question about length of time. How long was the design phase in particular?
For the new system that we're standing up right now, we started designing that in mid to late, I want to say it was the end of April 2014, and we finished that the first week in July. And again, that's to accommodate over 1,400 users, 13 different departments. So it's a very extensive design document on the order of 1,100 pages worth of configuration settings. So we did that pretty quickly. That was with a team of about 4 or 5 individuals representing all those different units.
Okay. Great, great. Another question here, any guidance on your trade-off balance between being risk-averse and the field of dreams? When do you know you're delivering enough value?
It's a great question. You've got to be able to listen to your users and understand that if you're asking them to do something that takes too much time, is too hard, then you really need to reevaluate how you've built the system and what you're asking them to do. So having the ability to get feedback is very important. However, on the other hand, sometimes it's okay to ask folks to do something that just makes the company better and maybe doesn't really have a positive effect for their day-to-day activities. We always had a rule of thumb where we wouldn't add additional time or scope to somebody's day or how they should be already managing their project. So whatever it took for you to write it down on a scratched piece of paper is kind of our baseline, our time and effort baseline that we wanted to achieve within the system, okay? So even though it's not maybe the field of dreams, people don't like to change. They like their pen and paper. They don't want to have to go enter that risk in the system. At least they can't say, well, it takes too long or it's too difficult. You try to remove those obstacles so that it's a break even from that standpoint. And then you're just purely dealing with the whole change principle.
Okay, great. Another question that came in, are you using resource negotiations? What is your experience?
We're currently not.
Here?
We are currently not in this business unit. There are folks that are using that to a certain extent. There's a group that is managing a portfolio of design projects, and they are having to, what are the resource requests and having those allocated to be balanced across the top priority of projects within that portfolio.
Okay. Another question, how large is your entire team, and how much value do you place on having enough resources to support your users for this project?
We have 5 individuals on the team that are dedicated close to full-time, okay, and that's for 1,400 users. And then the second part of that question, could you repeat that, Amy, for me?
Yeah, how much value do you place on having enough resources to support your users? I think basically the person's asking, do you think you have enough resources on the team to support the 1,400 users? Yeah,
the 5 is a challenge right now because we're doing the upgrade, and we also have some additional resources above and beyond the 5 within IT that are helping as part of that upgrade, and the resources at EPM Live that are helping. But the core team is 5 folks basically, and myself who kind of oversees them. It's a bit of a stretch right now, I'll be honest with you, because we're trying to both service the customers for use in the existing system and manage the upgrade project and perform a lot of work there. So we are pretty resource constrained in that regard, but I think 5 is adequate definitely when you're in a steady state for that number of users. And again, you got to kind of have your local champions. So for every maybe 10 to 20 folks, have somebody who's kind of your guru, who knows the system really well, who can kind of be your first line of defense. So your team, your core team, isn't always inundated with questions or requests for help.
Right. That's a good point. I guess one more question. What functionality of the tool has given you the most value?
I think there's really, I would say, 2 things that have really provided a lot of value. Number one, the ability to see everything on every project very easily, especially schedules being published to the sites. So that ability, which is really nice, and it's a very reasonable licensing product as well. And then the other is the reporting database. That's something that is unique to EPM Live. They pull all the data together in very nice tables in a reporting database that just enables all the custom reporting that you want. They have their out-of-the-box reporting and then a lot of custom reporting, and those are fantastic. And in the new version, we're excited about the Upland Analytics, which is different than the traditional SQL Services reporting that we're using today. It's more online and very easy to build quick reports. We're excited about that as well. So from a reporting standpoint, that's obviously a huge benefit.
Great. So I think that's the last of the questions. That was really, really informative. I enjoyed listening to this very much. If anyone has additional questions, you can reach out to Mark Francis, and he can put you in touch with Dan. And with that, I think we'll say goodbye. Dan, do you have any parting comments?
No, just thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope it was informative. And again, if you have follow-up questions or want further dialogue, I'm available. So thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.